I have a good friend in Scott Sorenson who I've known for a while. I honestly don't even know when we originally met. I'm assuming it's probably an AAU tournament back in the Dells in
Yeah.
Wisconsin years ago would be my guess. But Scott is a true grinder. He's been in a long time, has a great history, background, a lot of different things, has been an assistant for a while, but at a ton of different levels. We're talking college basketball Division 1, we're talking Division 2, we're talking overseas in the Netherlands, Ontario, all these different things. Was a head coach at Northland for 11 years, now an assistant at Dubuque in Dubuque, Iowa. Scott, honestly, I appreciate you taking some time here to sit down and talk about your story a little bit.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, and it should be fun. And I'll let you kind of guide it any way you want.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I was doing a little research, and I want you to tell me what you remember about growing up in Crystal, Minnesota, because what I did in a little background research here, Jeff Shue played in the NFL. He played at Minnesota in college, and then he ended up playing for the Bengals for 5 years, played with the Vikings and the Packers in the same season in 1986 as a linebacker. So I felt like this is perfect. He's from Crystal, Minnesota, where you're from, and he played for the Vikings and the Packers in the same season. So that brings us together here.
Well, we will ignore the fact that he played for the Packers, if that's okay with you. So, I started off. So, Crystal, Minnesota is basically just outside North Minneapolis. So, a lot of my time was spent, and I actually didn't move to Crystal. I was originally in a little farther out suburb until I was about 12 years old. And then parents divorced, and you know how those things can kind of go. And so I like to consider myself basically a North Sider, which some people might argue with that because I didn't actually live on the north side, even if I was maybe, a mile or mile and a half away from North Minneapolis. But I spent a lot of time, obviously, in North Minneapolis, and a lot of my influences athletically and coaching wise come from the Minneapolis Twin Cities area, and a lot of my mentors were in that area as well. And so to me, I was always one of those kids that I'm about 5'6", so my athletic abilities were always limited, and I can tell you that, like, ironically, the time that I decided that I wanted to coach basketball was because I wanted to be involved in sports in some way, shape, or form. I'd always kind of considered myself a leader, even at a young age, 10, 11, 12 years old, with playing baseball, football, whatever it may be, basketball. And so it was the last time that Michigan actually won the title against Seton Hall in 1989, and I was just shy of my 12th birthday. And I'm watching this, and I knew I was never going to be good enough to be at that level of playing or make it to the NBA. But I'm watching Steve Fisher from Michigan and PJ Carlissimo for Seton Hall, and the back and forth, and Ramil Robinson and the foul at the end of the game that maybe shouldn't have been the foul, and the arguing. And I'm like, going, holy cow, that's what I want to do, right? I'm not good enough to be on the floor, but I think I hopefully can learn enough about the game that I can be one of the guys on the sideline yelling at the referee, essentially. And that was literally like kind of the moment that the idea, even again, just shy of my 12th birthday, that I thought I would like to do this. I would like to see. I love the game of basketball. I watched it all the time. I mean, I was, 5 years old or just shy of 5 years old when Jordan hit the shot in '82. I remember Phi Slamma Jamma when I was like 6, and watching Georgetown was my favorite team growing up. John Thompson was a hero and idol of mine, even when I was 6, 7 years old, and just watching those teams growing up. That was kind of I was bitten by the basketball bug first, and then bitten by the coaching bug not too much later on.
Yeah. So those early days, you went to Minnesota. You were there from, and 98 to 2000, I believe it was. Where you worked for Clem Haskins, Dan Munson. Shortly after graduating from there, you go to De La Salle and you're working with Dave Thorson. A lot of big popular names in the college basketball world. What do you remember from those early days between college and getting out and working at De La Salle for Coach Thorson? I mean, what were those experiences kind of shaped? Did it match what you were thinking growing up watching Phi Slamma Jamma and PJ Carlissimo and all those names? I mean, did it match, or was it even that much better?
I mean, it was interesting. I actually started off 2 years at Southwest Minnesota State, and my first year I was 18, 19 years old, and I latched on as the head JV coach and varsity assistant for a tiny little school in southwestern Minnesota called Ballatin. It's now combined with Tracy Milroy. And my second year at Southwest Minnesota State, Tim Miles actually came in to be the head coach. And so Tim had a basketball class, and he'll tell you this, that he considers me part of his coaching tree, even if I never worked for him, because every time I bump into him, he says that. And he had a basketball coaching class at 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And every now and then I was in that class. Every now and then he'd call me at like 7:30 in the morning. You know, I'm a college kid, so I'm just rolling out of bed or whatever. And he'd say, Scott, I'm on the road recruiting. Can you teach class today? And I'd be like, yeah, what do you want me to do? And he's like, I don't know, bring him in the gym and show him the flex offense. I don't really care, whatever. You know what I mean? It's basketball coaching class, right? And so I kind of spent like a month with them before the high school season started. But I felt growing up like I didn't really have anybody kind of guiding me early on into the coaching game, which is way different than it is now. Like the young guys that are, whether they're players or managers or GAs or whatever, trying to get in, they have people that say, this is how the system works. This is how you move up. And I didn't really have that. So I always felt like the more I coached and the stronger I built my resume, that would matter more, where you kind of learn that, yeah, that's part of it, but bigger part of it now is having somebody in your corner to vouch for you more than it is how strong is your resume. And so I had an opportunity to work with Coach Miles, for about a month before the high school season. And looking back on it now, I probably should have not coached high school ball and just because he went from Southwest State to North Dakota State to Colorado State to Nebraska, and now he's out at San Jose State. And just looking at that journey that he had made me think, oh, I should have rode his coattails or whatever you want to call it. But at the time, like I didn't really have anybody to kind of tell me that that was the way to do it. And even at the time, it wasn't necessarily the way to do it, but that's kind of how the system works now. So spent 2 years there,
And
and then
not to cut you
no, go
off,
ahead.
but I think it was the one year that Coach Miles was out after Nebraska, before he went to San Jose State. Had a really good podcast. I think it was called Mind of Miles.
Mhm.
And interviewed a ton of coaches, right? But it was really cool to kind of hear a guy who had been in it a long time, been a head coach for a while. So if anybody listens to this or whatnot, check that out on YouTube. Mind of Miles. I think there's a lot of really good episodes there. So sorry to mean to cut you off.
Absolutely. And Coach Miles, just you sit down and listen to him. He's like one of the most fun guys to listen to, right? Because he's like his mind goes a million miles a minute, but he's got the capability of expressing those thoughts as quickly as he thinks of them,
For
and
sure.
it makes it really enjoyable to listen to him for sure. So, but then the University of Minnesota started a major called sports studies with an emphasis in coaching. And again, I thought more about essentially the resume more than the latching on to a certain type of guy. And so for me, it was kind of like that might be the way to go. And if I'm going to transfer from Southwest Minnesota State to the University of Minnesota, I wanted to be involved in the basketball program. So I reached out just on a whim and got a hold of the basketball program, and they had a principal secretary named Carolyn. And Carolyn said, we don't have a managerial spot, but we have an office spot where you're going to work directly with the coaches, with recruiting, with helping out with scouting reports, more of the inner workings as opposed to the on the floor type of stuff. And she thought that would actually be a really, really good role for me. And so I went in, and I remember sitting down in Coach Haskins' office and sitting across from a guy that I'd watched since I was a little kid. And I remember just kind of looking up and going, holy buckets, that's Coach Clem Haskins. Like, oh my God, like I was starstruck for the better part of like a minute and a half. Like he was talking and I was just kind of like stone faced, like, oh my gosh, like this is a guy I watched on television since I was like 3 years old, or well, I guess he took the job in '86. So since I was like 9, like just, to have that wherewithal to know I was in the presence of a really good coach and a really good person. And yeah, it was different than what I thought it would be, but part of that is because of Coach Haskins and his generosity and his willingness to talk with you about, and his staff, Bobby Jones and Coach Cunningham and some of those guys that Coach Brown that really kind of took me under their wing a little bit and kind of showed me the inner workings and whatnot. And it got a little different. Like I'm going to say this, and I think in this business, especially at those levels, you have to be good. Right. You have to be a good coach. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be organized. You have to have freedom of thought and those types of things. But you also have to have a little bit of luck. And I'm not saying yet you have to be lucky. I'm saying you have to have enough luck to show, like, be lucky enough to show people how good you are. Because if you're lucky and you're not good, it's not going to work. But if you're good and you're not lucky, you may not get that opportunity, right? And I think most coaches at that Power 5 level, whatever you wanna call it, or any D1 level are gonna tell you, "I got a lucky break when this happened or when that happened," and if a coach that if you're an assistant coach and you get fired and your head coach gets fired, are you lucky enough to be retained by the next coach? Are you lucky enough that somebody you know has a spot on their staff for you? Because that doesn't always happen. And so I think there's something to be said for that. So when Coach Haskins got let go, and we can talk about that story another time. I'm a very loyal guy, so I'm very loyal to Coach Haskins. And Coach Munson came in, he didn't have to retain me. So that was kind of lucky on my behalf, but it was also unlucky because Coach Haskins had talked about what the next step was going to be for me and whether or not I could move up to maybe being an assistant ops person or the ops person at a Big Ten institution right away out of college. And that was kind of the plan initially in the conversations I had with him. And obviously that didn't work out that way. So, yeah, but I will tell you that without my time at Minnesota, I don't get to be an assistant coach for Dave Thorson at De La Salle because Dave and I knew the same people because he had been an assistant for Minnesota and he took over at De La Salle, and I went overseas to Europe and coached over there. And when I came back to the States and I wasn't sure if I should go back to Europe or what I was going to do, there was an opportunity opening up at De La Salle to join their staff, and Dave brought me in on an interview, and it worked out great. Like, it was two of the most fun years I ever had coaching basketball simply because of everything I learned from Coach Thorson.
No, that's great. I think you make some really good points there with, I actually just mentioned this the other day, talking about being retained, right? Like, do you make yourself good enough or presentable enough or, whatever it is, your basketball acumen. And sometimes, like you said, there is some luck involved with that, right? I was looking the other day, and Dusty May, who actually we were just talking about before we started recording here, Dusty May was fired technically in 2011 when he was at Louisiana Tech with Kerry Rupp, but then Mike White comes in and Mike White keeps him on, right? And Danny Hurley was fired on the Rutgers staff with Kevin Bannon way back in the day in 2001, and there's all these people that go through things, but it's like, okay, how do you stay in it, right? Whether you're being retained or what's your next move if something goes wrong. Getting that recruiting experience and more administrative type stuff, do you feel that maybe down the road, looking at your experience, and obviously you're still involved with things heavily, do you think having that kind of organizational inside office piece was really vital looking back now, as opposed to, hey, Scott, we can use you on the floor, you can wash uniforms, you can whatever, more like, hey, no, you're actually going to be at this office and this spot where you're going to help more from a managerial standpoint of organization type stuff. Do you think that helped you propel yourself down the road even more?
Well, I think I think there was advantages and disadvantages certainly either way, right? If you're on the floor, you have the advantage of, and I got to go to practice and things, but I obviously couldn't work on the floor. So I would, if I was, didn't have a whole lot of work to do on a certain day, I could, and our offices weren't inside Williams Arena. It wasn't far. It was maybe about 2 or 3 blocks. I could just walk down to the arena or whatnot. But I think it gave me kind of an insight to the stuff that goes on that you may not know how to approach it when you get these types of jobs, when you become an assistant coach, when you become a head coach. And to be honest, looking back on it now, like at the Division 3 level where I've been at for the last 14 years, and even when I was at the Division 2 levels for the 6 years prior to being at this level, we don't have staffs of, I don't have 12 managers and 3 GAs, and you know what I mean. My boss has my boss, me, and our GA. Essentially, we have to do almost short of arranging flights, right? Because we still have to arrange hotels and we still have to arrange
Yeah.
buses and pregame, postgame meal, and all that. And essentially, we have to do almost exactly everything that's being done at a Division 1, at a larger Division 1 institution, but with, like, 70% less people. And so kind of getting the inner workings of that actually was pretty beneficial now, more now than it was immediately afterwards. And just trying to figure out what, like, my advice for all the young guys out there that are either getting into coaching or want to get into coaching or whatever is, our jobs essentially as assistant coaches is to do two things. One, put out fires before they become large, forest fires. And two, try to figure out what's the information that our head coach needs to know, what does he not need to know? And so it's one of those deals where you're constantly trying to think ahead of the game, because my job essentially is to make my boss's job as easy as can be, because he's got enough pressure on him, right? Like, in 11 years as the head coach at Northland College, during the season, I would pick 1 or 2 days a week that I wouldn't come into the office until 10 o'clock, because if I came in at 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, there's going to be somebody in my office. And if I needed to watch 4 hours of film, that wasn't going to get done in my office because I have this player coming in or this professor calling. And I also served as the assistant athletic director for my last 5 years there. And so now I'm dealing with that stuff on top of the head coaching stuff and, just those types of things. I'm like, all right, I've got to watch this film for 4 hours. I'm going to spend from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock in the morning just making sure I've watched this film, clipping it up, doing whatever I have to do, and then go into the office because I know I'm going to get bombarded with this, that, and the other thing. And I think the experience at Minnesota helped me more for that, which happened not until years later than it did immediately going on.
Yeah, we were just talking about this before we got on air about getting into hoops and now having, and technically more opportunities, but more competition. And you laid this out very well going back to the Division 1 days of, way back in the day, it was the head coach, 3 assistants, and maybe an ops guy or somebody, who was in the background kind of organizing stuff. Now, like you said, we were talking about the title game and Michigan and all these different assistants and people and managers and student assistants and all that different types of stuff. Just kind of talk about from a perspective of you and how long you've been in it. What do you see if I'm a young kid and I'm graduating from Dubuque and I'm maybe interested in basketball. Maybe I helped out my last year there as just a student that wanted kind of an experience, and I was a student assistant. Like, what do you feel like is the best way to get involved? Is it still doing the camps in the summer? Is it literally jumping online and trying to connect with people? Is it having just somebody vouch for you and network with you? Or is it everything, all the above? Like, how do you feel like is the best way to go about getting connected in today's business?
Yeah, I think you're probably asking the wrong guy on that, just because my journey was so different and unique that I think that it's a case of that there's no one way to do it, and that a lot of the young men and women that want to get involved in coaching basketball at one, is it better to start off as being a high school coach like I did? Is it better to latch on and try to, because if you go, I'll give you a really good example. So when I was trying to decide, so I was at the assistant coach at Minnesota Crookston Division 2 for 4 years, and my buddy Eric Peterson, who's now the head coach at South Dakota. Eric had just left Minnesota State Moorhead as their second assistant to go be the head coach at Williston State. And so he went to go be the head coach at Wilson State, and he asked if I would join him. Now, the job was going to pay like $6,000 to $8,000 a year. It didn't have health insurance. I get an apartment that I could live in, like an on-campus apartment. I would also have to serve as the assistant softball coach, which he was the head softball coach. So, and I did some softball coaching at Crookston because at D2 you got to have like multiple jobs, just like you have to typically at Division 3. And so I was set to join him. What ended up happening is Northland called me the same day that I was going to tell my boss I was going to leave to go to Williston. And so I went out and interviewed at Northland, and I had to choose: is it better for me to be a D head coach or to go with Eric? And there are days that certainly that I felt bad for Eric because I know he was really relying on me, and we still joke about it a little bit to this day that I kind of spurned him, and you know what I mean? I think he might still be a little upset with me. I'm not 100% sure, but we still talk every now and then. And I didn't know that Eric was going to go from Williston to be an assistant for Craig Smith at South Dakota, to being an assistant at Utah State, to being an assistant at Utah, to being, and I might be with him the whole time. Do you know what I mean? Like I could be an assistant at South Dakota now, but when I talked to Tim Miles about what I should do, Tim basically said, well, Eric's a good guy and he's a good coach, but you're going to put your future in his hands. If he doesn't do well and you guys get let go, then you might be out of a job and you're scrambling around. Whereas if he's like, if it were me, I'd rather have my future in my hands. I would take the Northland job and say, basically it's up to me to make sure that the program goes in the right direction. Like, if we're going to go down, we're going down my way, kind of deal. And again, there's times I look at it and I say maybe I should have gone with Eric, and Eric's doing really well, and he's had a great career, and I'm really happy for him and really proud of him as a friend. But at the same time, it's like, I was a head coach for 11 years, and that's an experience that not a lot of people can say they've had at any level of college basketball.
100%. No, and it's so tough to get those D3 jobs. And Eric obviously is such a great dude, so I can imagine how tough of a decision that was for you. I want to go back in time here because, again, I don't think we'll have anybody on the pod like yourself that can talk about the Extreme Basketball Association and the Ontario Professional Basketball Organization.
Yeah.
So, the Extreme Basketball Association and Ontario Professional Basketball Organization, you know, I could have been a really good podcast host and looked some stuff up and try to dig into the archives, but I'd rather hear it from the man himself. So, what can you tell me about both of those organizations and leagues?
Yeah, so there was I had just gotten back from coaching pro ball. Well, I had just gotten back from coaching pro ball in Europe, and it was May of 2002, I believe. And I'm trying to figure out what the next step is. You know what I mean? Do I go overseas? And this is right before I had had an opportunity to join the staff at De La Salle in Minneapolis. And so there used to be all kinds of like message boards and those types of things and coaching
Before
board like
social media, message boards
yeah,
were the
like
thing.
this
Yeah.
is there was no Twitter, no Facebook. Those things didn't exist. Boy, I'm really dating myself here, right? Hopefully I don't look as old on the
No,
podcast, but
I was gonna say your hair looks good. You don't have a ton of gray.
yeah, no, there's gray. I mean, I was thinking about getting a haircut before this, but I just didn't have time this week and and so there was a gentleman, and I'm not gonna say his name just because he and I didn't exactly get along in the long run, but he was starting up an organization, a new summer pro league called the Extreme Basketball Association, and there were four teams, and they were located in the South. Mine was in Wilmington, North Carolina. There was a team in Hickory, South Carolina, and a couple other locations. Uh, and so, and he was trying to start this upstart league, and the catch to it was you get 3 points for a dunk, which I think is a little bit, because you can define dunk in different ways. Like, are you just laying it in and touching the rim? Like, how do those types of things. And so I kind of reached out to him and said, look, I just got back from coaching pro ball in Europe. It was top division ball in Holland. We had 5 Division I guys on our. I'm interested in doing this, and he's like, great. And he's like, I can pay you like $250 a week and put you up in a hotel, or we ended up staying in a dorm room at the local community college, Cape Fear Community College. And so we had some dudes in that league. Like, I'm again probably going to date myself, but like BJ Mackey, who was a All-American for South Carolina.
South
I had
Carolina,
Richard
yep.
Richard Dumas was on my team. If anybody remembers that name, he was NBA All-Rookie team alongside Charles Barkley with the Phoenix Suns back in '93 when they went to the finals. So Richard Dumas was on my team. Just a fantastic guy. I know he had struggled with some mental health and substance abuse issues prior to that, but what ended up happening is like our guys weren't getting paid. It's kind of a familiar story with some of those upstart leagues, and guys weren't getting paid. I was basically buying our guys dinner and lunch and all that kind of stuff as much as possible. And he was coaching a team, which I didn't think the owner of the league should probably be coaching a team, but he wanted his team to be, because he always fancied himself a coach, even if he really wasn't a coach. And so he wasn't really being fair across the board. So we went and played his team one night, and he had like 4 ex-NBA guys. I had Richard Dumas, who was really good and averaged like 28 points a game for us in that season that we played. But it was maybe like the 9th or 10th game of the year, and his team beat us by like 40. Well, he's got 4 Division I guys on. I got 2 guys who played 2 years of JUCO ball on my team, you know what I mean, in my starting lineup. And I kind of, we had a chat afterwards, and I'm like, look, if you want this league to survive, you're going to have to make it competitive, not just your team and everybody else. Because I think at the time his team was like 11-0, and everybody else was fighting 500,
Yeah.
and the league obviously didn't last because of that. But there was a guy that was kind of the GM of my team, or the assistant GM of my team, and then a few years later, after 2 years at De La Salle, that same guy who was Canadian, he was starting a league called the Ontario Professional Basketball Association up in Ontario. And so he was trying to start up his own pro league. And he was like, Scott, you're a good coach. I want you to come up and coach one of the teams. And my team was in Welland, Ontario, which is literally right on the other side of the border from Niagara Falls. And I had a few D1 guys and mostly D2 guys on my team. In that league, we got about 10 games into that league, and our players hadn't gotten paid, and I hadn't gotten paid. And To this day, he probably still owes me about $4,000 or $5,000. And this is back in like 2004. And so the players across the league decided if we don't get paid, we're just not going to play in these games. And so most of the teams basically just stopped playing. And so most of my guys decided that they were just going to head home. So they called their families and whatnot and got plane tickets. And it was a unique experience because the amount of talent in both leagues was phenomenal. The basketball itself was really, really good. It was a blast to coach professionally again after being over in Europe for a bit. But, those types of leagues, again, for me, it was it was less about trying to latch on to the right coach and climb the ladder that way. It was more about building my resume and giving me enough experience so that I would become a good coach, because if I'm going to get lucky in this business and get to the Division I level, I needed to be as good a coach as possible. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then after that, you start this run of D3 and D2 experiences, which I think, was it 04, 05, and 05, 06? Was that when you were at Lakeland?
That was at Lakeland, yeah, with Coach Gary Gresh, and I can tell you that like each coach that I've worked for, I've learned something different or gave me something that to this day I still use on a day-to-day basis, right? So with Coach Thorson, I learned intensity and attention to detail and how basically to operate a smaller De La Salle, not to say that De La Salle is a smaller institution, but it's high school, how to operate a lower level at a big time level, if that kind of makes sense, right? And
Yep.
and really, I learned more from him about the on the floor stuff than anybody I'd ever worked for. Like the man is a walking, like he likes to say that whenever like I met his high school coach, and he always said, this guy's forgotten more basketball than I'll ever
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Well, that's how I feel about Dave Thorson, right? Like he's forgotten. Dave would take his coaching staff and go down and I remember one year they went down to the Dallas Mavericks and spent a week with the Mavericks over the summertime talking with their coaches and picking up their pick up some of the things they do offensively, and those like he does that every summer, did that every summer when he was at De La Salle. We're going to go learn from some different coaches. We're going to bring something that we can bring back to our to De La Salle High School, right? Like people think it's all and coaches are the best thieves. We know that, right? We
Yep,
see
yep.
something we really like all of a sudden, a couple years ago it was everybody's running Princeton, and in Wisconsin everybody runs the swing because of
Yeah,
what
yeah, because of
you know what I
Bo.
mean, what was going on at Wisconsin, like that. That's how it works. And so he would go out and find coaches that he knew that were doing something different or innovative and try to bring that back. Under Gary or Coach Gresh at Lakeland, I learned how to be a professional. And true story, and I told this to Gary, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway, so you may have to fix this in post. But so my first year with Gary, like I thought I knew what I was doing, but I had never actually coached at the college level. I coached professionally, I coached at the high school level, but never at the college level. And the way that Gary had it set up was if you were doing the scout for a certain team, and we had two other assistant coaches. One was Jeff Nicholas, and Jeff, he's out of the business now, but his dad was like a legendary coach in Wisconsin. And the other,
Yeah, his dad was a great high school coach in my hometown of Antigo, actually, way
yeah,
back in the
exactly.
day.
Yeah,
So yeah,
Anago, exactly. Right. And the other was Josh Wolf, who's actually now an assistant at Tulsa or Tulane, Tulsa,
yeah,
I believe
Tulsa
it
just
is.
lost in the
And they
NIT.
were
Yep,
just in the
yep.
NIT championship. Yeah. So he had a pretty good staff to go along with him. But I remember so we divided up the scouting reports. Each coach got, was, a third of the scouts or whatever. And I remember we were playing Edgewood, and it was my scout, and it was like my second or third scout under Gary. I'm still learning how he wanted things done and whatnot. Well, Gary had it so that if it was your scout, you were in charge of the matchups. So whenever one team would sub or your job was to, well, there was a moment, and Edgewood was the best team in the league my first year there. They had Seth Cooper, I think is working for the Sacramento Kings
Yeah,
now,
Seth
or
Cooper. Yeah.
maybe Golden State, something like that. And Seth was their best player. And so they were subbing three guys, and all of a sudden we sent two in the game, and you had about 10 seconds to figure it out. And whenever Seth was in the game, we had to have Howie on Seth, and because Howie's our best defender, and I couldn't get the matchups done quickly. So all of a sudden we got the wrong defender on Seth, and he comes off a stagger, and we couldn't get through it, and he drops a three on us. And we're at Edgewood's gym. And if you've never been in Edgewood's gym, there's only bleachers on one side. It's a little dome, and it is loud and it echoes. And Gary turns to me and just starts if you can't get the matchups down, I'll find somebody who can. And I'm like, my face is glowing red. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. And like, oh my God, maybe this isn't for me or whatnot. And I kid you not, I didn't sleep for like a month. Like I was having nightmares about getting let go from a job that was basically essentially a volunteer job that I got like $1,000 and a meal a day for, right? Like I was substitute teaching on the side to make ends meet, right? Because the school didn't give Gary a full-time assistant or any kind of, he had 2 GAs and me, and that was essentially it. And, but I tell you what, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me because I learned at that point that if I want to be in it, I better start to figure out what I'm doing. And part of that means I had to learn what he wanted. How does he want things to operate? Not just how I felt they should, how he should. And so the next year, I would watch, and this is back in the days of VHS tapes, right? Like not even DVDs. We had VHS tapes that we came in for film at night before Synergy and Huddle and all that kind of stuff. And so I would watch every team that I was scouting 3 times. And the first time I would watch the personnel. The second time I would watch what actions they're running. And the third time I would watch would be just simply for their substitution patterns. And I got so good at it that I would say, okay, they're about 6 minutes in. I think here comes number 10. He's going to come in for number 3. This is the matchup that we're going to go with. Like I got so good that I knew who they were subbing and who I was going to match them up with before they even made the substitution. And without Gary literally just saying, do it and get it done the way I want it done and taught me how to be a professional day in and day out, I don't think I'm still in this game. And I think there's something to be said about learning from each coach. And you might get yelled at. I might get yelled at by my boss today. And you know what I mean? I've been doing it as long as he has. But my job is to make sure he doesn't have to. And if I make a mistake, I expect to be called out on it. If I don't do something right, or I don't have a matchup down, or I call out the wrong defensive assignment coverage, whatever it is in a game, I expect him to call me out. And I never take it personally. We're competitors. We're trying to do the same thing. And whatever decision he makes, whether I had a suggestion that was otherwise, I'm backing him up 100%. Because he might take my suggestion and it may not work, and that's going to come back on me. But if he makes a decision, our entire team needs to know that, hey, he's making the best decision that he feels. And of course, it helps having a boss who's really, really good at this too, right? Like we don't disagree a whole lot, and when we do, it's not a whole lot different because we see things kind of the same way. So yeah, my time at Lakeland was so incredibly valuable to me. And then from there, I spent 2 years with Gary at Lakeland, and I got an opportunity to go to Bemidji State.
Yeah, I just
Where,
want to touch on, so
yeah, yeah,
with Gary,
yeah,
I mean, again, like, what he's done in his coaching career is unbelievable, right? I
yeah.
mean, he's been so good for so long, what he's doing at St. Norbert. And I always joke with him, but I'm actually dead serious. I was a freshman on that 04-05 team at Marion in 05-06, which again, I didn't, sophomore year, I played more minutes than I did freshman year. But I always say that 04-05 year, excuse me, Jermaine James hit a buzzer beater that I still think is
Yes,
no
I
good at
remember
this
that
time.
game at your place.
I
Yep.
still think that shot. So I always tell Gary, I always, once in a while I'll text him and be like, hey, just so you know that Jermaine James shot is still under review and I think it's going to get waved off. So,
It actually, I've watched the film. You're not wrong. I don't want to take that win away from Gary, but yeah, and Jermaine was so good. Like he was just such a good player, and he wasn't even that great of a shooter, but for him to get that shot off, and yeah, I think if we have video review, maybe that does get waved off. But it was
maybe we need to
yeah.
pull up one of those VHSs and
Yeah,
check it out.
I'm sure it's somewhere. Gary probably has it in his archives. But I
Yeah.
mean, Gary's a guy who could easily be a top tier Division I coach. And I think he stays, part of the reason that he left, from my understanding, that he left, he was out at Youngstown State as an assistant. Part of the reason he left the Division I to go Division III was, one, to get back home to Wisconsin, and two, he's as tight a family man as possible, and he wanted to be around with his kids. Obviously, Garrett played for him, and his daughter's at Wisconsin, if I'm not
She
mistaken.
actually just transferred to Green Bay this year. Was at Green Bay this
Oh,
year.
okay.
So,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay. So yeah, like just, he's just such a family guy and wanted to be around and see his kids grow up and not always be on the road. the way that Division I guys sometimes or oftentimes have to do. And but he's as good a coach as anybody in the country, and he could easily go, and have a ton of success at any level that he wanted to go at. So yeah.
Yeah, and I love your story about, getting yelled at. I mean, early on when I was working for Coach Buchanan at Superior and Carroll, it's some of those times where like, you need those wake up calls, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, it's the defining moments of like, okay, are you going to fix it and become better? Or are you just going to be this guy that's just going to fade away like, so many others that have done it, right? And if that's your choice, that's your choice. But it's some of those early moments where it's like, and stories, right? You can tell people that are underneath your tree and people that you're coaching, like, hey, here's the experience I had. Like, I'm just telling you, this is what my expectations are. This is what I want it to be. And, if it's not good enough, like, I'm going to let you know about it. Right. So I
Yeah,
think that's a,
it's a fight or flight deal, right? Like if you really want to be in it, people like to use the word grinder, like you said, and I think there's, I think there's something to be said for that. Like the guy like Dusty May is a grinder, right? Like all the experiences, he's had a little bit of luck, obviously, but he's good. He's so good that you put how good he is with the fact that he's willing to grind and show up the night before and watch UConn play and take notes and do all that,
yep.
and he's on the phone 20 minutes after winning the national championship because a portal just opened up. And I mean, those are the guys who, there's two different thought processes with regards to this business now. It's, are you trying to get as high as you can, as quickly as you can, or are you trying to stay in it as long as you can, right? And
Yep.
I think longevity says something every bit as much as like I still have the dream from time to time about, can I get to the Division I level? Could I be a Division I assistant, be it, mid major or Power Five or whatever, or be a head coach at one of the smaller schools? There's still part of me that thinks about that and dreams about that. Maybe I'll get that opportunity and maybe not. But at the same time, I get to wake up every morning and look at myself in the mirror and say, I am living the dream. I'm a college basketball coach, and that's all I've ever wanted to do. And for the last 22 going on 23 years now, that's what I've done.
Yep.
So there's both of it, right? The dream of getting to a higher level and the dream of staying in it as long as you can.
For sure. And after that, you were just touching on, you made the move to Bemidji. You're there at Bemidji for a few years. You're at, I believe it was 4 years at Crookston as the head assistant. What really struck me and what I enjoy, and you were actually just touching about this, about small college basketball or small college coaches, and you're doing tennis at Bemidji, you're doing softball at Crookston.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. And again, I think that there's some coaches, right, that have done those jobs. And again, if you've made it up the tree in the small college world, you've definitely had your share of those. I coach tennis myself on the men's and women's side. But there's some people that it's a secondary duty and I'm just here to do basketball. But then there's some people here that, hey, we have the best season in tennis history at Bemidji. Like
At
there's,
the time it was, it isn't
yeah.
anymore, but yeah.
What was that mindset of like, if you're going to do this, like you're not just doing this because it's your secondary role and I'm just going to do it. Like I'm actually going to go all in and make this as great of an experience as it can be for the kids.
Yeah, there's something to be said about, and you see it now, especially at the highest levels, at the Power Five levels and everything, that the transactional relationships versus a transformational. And I've always been one to believe that if I'm going to do something, the kids deserve as much attention and as much effort as I could possibly put in. And so, I've always believed too that a good coach can coach anything, right? So if you're, ironically, the one sport that I was probably best at, and I'm not saying I was good because I wasn't, but football is the one sport that I was probably best at, but that was the one sport that I've never actually coached. Like I got the tennis job was really interesting because when I went to Bemidji State, they had an opening. I got the job. Matt Bowen was the head coach I worked for 2 years. One of the best coaches I've ever been around as well. Just an offensive minded guy who understands freedom of spacing and movement. And we thought of things very, very similarly offensively. Like we were absolutely on the same page. And just kind of side note on that, like what I learned, what I learned from him was confidence. I'm the second assistant. I'm getting paid a hotel room to live in. That's my payment for basketball. And tennis paid me $6,000 a year to be the head Division II women's tennis coach. And that was it. Like Little Caesars $5 pizza, my best friend, right? Like I learned how to stretch one of those out, and Matt would find little ways to help me out and take care of me too. And I always appreciated his generosity and those things well. But I remember after my first year, we were doing kind of my end of the year review in his office, and he said, you know what your biggest problem is? You know exactly what you're talking about, but you don't open your mouth enough. He gave me the confidence to say, when you're on the floor, you know what you're doing. I'm going to let you coach, and to be able to go in every day my second year with Bemidji and do that. But like the tennis thing was interesting because it was August 15th. They were a week away from the kids coming in, and they didn't have a women's tennis coach. So Matt was like, "Do you know anything about tennis?" And I was like, "Man, I played in the 8th grade, but I sucked. So I don't know what." So I go into the athletic director's office and I sit down across from him, and I kid you not, it's a 30-second interview. And he goes, "What do you know about tennis?" And I said, "Well, I played in the 8th grade, so I know the rules." And then he goes, "All right, last question." I'm like, "Last question? You only asked me one." And he goes, "Do you have a valid driver's license?" And I go, "Well, why do you need to know if I have a valid driver's license?" He's like, "Well, you got to be able to drive the team van to go to meets." And I'm like, "Yeah, I got a valid driver's license." He goes, "All right, you're hired." And that was it. All of a sudden, I'm a Division II head women's tennis coach. And our I felt like, number one, you have to recruit, right? You got to have a roster. So I did a lot of tennis recruiting on the side, and tennis recruiting is a little bit easier than basketball recruiting because you don't necessarily have to watch whether or not they were a good player. Oh, you went 20-3, your senior year in matches. Yeah, you're probably good enough to come and play. And we didn't have like we're D2, but we had maybe, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000 worth of scholarship that we could divide up. Like this girl was getting $500 and this girl might get 700, or, things of that nature. And so we recruited, and then I wanted the girls to feel like they were being coached, even if I didn't know a whole lot about tennis, right? So I'm watching tennis videos, I'm reading tennis books, I'm gathering drills. And of course, I came up with my own terminology, right? Like, because I don't know tennis terminology. So I'm like, "I just want you to punch it." And they're like, "What the heck does that mean?" You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And the girls actually, it was about, creating team cohesiveness, right? Like I wanted them to pull for each other. I wanted them to want to win. And we did a lot of weightlifting stuff that maybe they had never done before. And we did a lot of, conditioning, and just how do I make them feel like they're being coached, even if I don't necessarily know how to coach specific skill in that sport? And I got better at it, obviously. And so the girls, like, we ended up, my second year, we took 4th in the league. My number one singles player got MVP. And just one of those deals where I felt like I wanted to me, it was helping me become a better coach because I was learning how to create that, that family feel, that family atmosphere, those types of things, because it doesn't matter whether it's tennis or softball or track. Like I did at Sheboygan South, I was a track coach for a couple of years. Regardless of what sport I was coaching, can I coach? You know what I mean? And that's not always just taking somebody on the basketball court and teaching them, different ways to finish, or how to get into their shots coming off the screens. It's, can you coach? And I learned a lot of doing that. And I still stay in contact with pretty much all of those girls I still watch Wimbledon now. And I had
Yeah.
never watched tennis before, but I'm watching Wimbledon and the French Open coming up and all that stuff. So yeah,
No, that's the same experience I had. I mean, I was the guy in gym class who hit the balls over the tennis fence so I can go in the river.
me
And,
too.
it was like, "Hey, can you recruit? Can you provide an experience?" And I'm like, "I can recruit and I can provide an experience." It's like, "Well, you're the coach, right?" And it's one of those things that, myself doing it, I learned so much about how individual sports teams kind of feel shunned in athletic departments, where they don't get the love of the teams, right? And I understand why, right? Like the rosters are smaller and things like that. But like you mentioned, you get an MVP on the team, you're doing some great things with them. And sometimes it's pretty cool to kind of see those individual teams kind of shine. Yeah, there's doubles and there's team events and things, but at the end of the day, it is more of a one-on-one sport. And so I learned a lot of just appreciation where it was like, hey, like, this is different than being around, the basketball side of things and everything like that. So, going to Crookston, being a head assistant there and then making your way to Northland, do you feel like being at Lakeland, being at Crookston, in some ways like sold you to Ashland? Because it's like, again, you're talking about remote spots within college basketball in the Midwest. And you're talking
Yeah.
about Howard's Grove's campus and Crookston's. And right, everyone's got positives and negatives because I always said that Lakeland's campus is absolutely beautiful. It really is. It's a very nice
It
campus,
is.
but it's in the middle of nowhere in some ways. And so people are like, well, it's in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, well, they got really nice facilities. So would you rather go into a city where the campus is really kind of dingy and dull and outdated, but it's in a city? Or would you rather go somewhere where maybe it's a little bit more remote, but it's a beautiful campus? And it's like, well, I don't know. I'd maybe kind of choose that more so. So what did you all learn in terms of those experiences of recruiting to areas that people would say, man, that's got to be a tough sell?
Yeah, I mean, Crookston was always a really tough sell. But it was Division II, so certainly having the scholarships and scholarship, and we weren't fully funded, but we weren't terribly far away. Sitting at like 8.5, 8.7, I think it was. Northland was a totally different animal, because it's Division III. You're in a town of 7,000, 8,000 people. The campus has, when I first got there, we had 750 students. When I left, there was about 300. And so you could sense we had a year that was, we built it up and built it up and built it up, and then all of a sudden it was much tougher. The resources went down. It just became tougher and tougher and tougher. And I don't regret going to Northland. And I mean, I got to be a head college coach. And you look around, you take Division I, Division II, Division III, NAIA, JUCO, NCCAA, whatever, some of the smaller Christian organizations and those types of things. There's what, maybe 1,500, 1,600 head college coaching jobs in the country. And it's getting smaller every day, right? Because schools are closing. And Northland certainly did that just about a year ago. To say that I was a head coach is not something that everybody gets an opportunity to do. And, I think that the part about Northland that I think I appreciate the most, one obviously is the relationships with the guys that I still have. And I think, again, transformational versus transactional. And I look at Maverick Harris, who played for me for 4 years, is now the head coach of an NAIA school down in Indianapolis. Tyler Peterson is an assistant coach at Division II Minnesota Duluth. And Aaron Houle, these are all guys that played for me, as an assistant coach at Division II Concordia St. Paul. And Rio Jackson is a high school coach out in California. And a lot of these guys that came in and played for me, there's nothing I wouldn't do for them for the rest of their lives. If there's anything, we've gone to wed. Danon Briggs is still the assistant coach at Ashland High School. He married an Ashland girl, and he's a Twin Cities guy. And they still live in Ashland, and now they have they have kids, and you know what I mean. But we went to a wedding last summer, and we've been to baby showers, and we've gone to graduate degree graduations, and you name it. And that's kind of what it's all about at the end of the day, right? Like, you're trying to win, you're trying to stay in the game, you're trying to reach the highest level that you can, obviously make money, and enough to live on and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like, if I don't take that job at Northland, I don't have those experiences. We took the team to the playoffs for the first time in 12 years. We had a home playoff game for the first time in 17 years. I was conference coach of the year in 2017, which is crazy because, like, if that tells you how difficult of a job that was, we finished fourth that year.
Well, and
Now imagine,
that was the best year since '96, if I'm not mistaken,
yeah,
right?
yeah, it was. And just imagine that, right? Like, we finished fourth, and the rest of the coaches in the league went, "Holy cow, you took fourth at Northland? Whoa, that's way better than the guys who took first, second, and third did," because we weren't expected to do that stuff. And the funny thing is, I think I did way less coaching that year that we were named coach of the year than I did previously, because that year I had 5 seniors, most of whom had been in the program for 4 years. So a couple of them were like 2-year JUCO guys, transfers, and I had 5 juniors, most of whom had been in the program for at least a year, if not two, usually three. And I took those 10 guys and said, "We're just going to ride you guys. Like, I don't have to coach. Like, I'll sit on the bench and do the Phil Jackson where I'll cross my legs and put my hands back and say, 'Go play,' because I've already taught you everything that I can probably teach you." And they did so well, and I was so proud of that team. But it's 20. We had a 4-year stretch that was the best 4-year stretch of any 4-year stretch in the history of that program where we were, above 500 in league and made the playoffs and, finished fourth a couple times and just, you know what I mean? Those types of things. But you could see, and then when we got to 1920, I had graduated 13 starters in 3 years. And the cupboard, think about that. That's more than 4 starters per year. And the cupboard was suddenly kind of dried up. And so we went out and probably brought in the most talented class I'd ever brought in, and they got a lot of experiences as freshmen. And then COVID hit, and that was a really bad time to be a young team because we didn't have an opportunity. We played 8 games and had 40 practices in the
Yeah.
2021 season. So that's when you could kind of see that the school started really falling off the cliff, and it was you knew it, you could feel it in your bones that it was time to get out. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about transformational experience, and obviously you had a ton of bye games. I mean, you guys were playing, really high level opponents. I mean, I remember you North Dakota State, and obviously you go play UMD if I'm not mistaken, and
Hmm.
different teams that, like, I mean, again, if you're a Division III guy, yes, you're in Ashland, right? Smaller town, remote area of Wisconsin, but you're getting a really great experience. Like regardless of level, regardless of league, like if you're a kid, you're going to play up there, like you're getting a true experience in terms
For
of,
sure.
fundraising that you were doing up there. I know we had talked at one point, I mean, just the money that you were bringing in and working it. And again, building it like we've always said at different places, it was a D1 experience at the D3 level, right? I mean, it's a little bit smaller level and things like that, but obviously you built it, and you were kind of mentioning there, but you noticed, post COVID, that things were kind of, again, we've seen it with Finlandia, we've seen it with Cardinal Stritch and Iowa Wesleyan and Silver Lake
Hmm.
and all these different schools. Did you see that, post COVID, where that sped up kind of the process of, Northland kind of being on the tight in terms of closing and things like that?
Yeah, and I mean, I give a little bit of credit to the administration at Northland simply because we didn't furlough anybody, we didn't lay anybody off. Like I'm sitting at home because we weren't allowed into our office. Like Northland took COVID extremely seriously, and like we were testing 3 times a week. We were wearing masks inside everything and all that kind of stuff. So I give a little bit of credit to the administration for just finding a way to get us through it where we didn't have to lay anybody off and do those types of things. And we followed the rules as much as we possibly could and those types of things. But you could see it across small colleges everywhere. And so whereas right now there's more opportunity for younger coaches to get into the game, and obviously that means more competition because more people want to get into it. There's also less and less opportunity for student athletes because of some of the smaller schools that are closing. Not to mention, if the NCAA passes this 5-year rule and those types of things, that's going to change a lot of things as well for high school kids coming out. And so more opportunities for coaches, but less opportunities for student athletes, and that's going to keep going back and forth. And I don't know what the solution is. I have plenty of thoughts on the deal, and I want to get into all of my thoughts on it. But it's one of those deals where you could see it start to happen at Northland, where I get like and part of it too, like I always say you can either have less kids paying more or more kids paying less. And what ended up happening is as our student enrollment population fell off, my basketball program, we were never below, 18 kids, 20 kids on the roster. Like, you know what I mean? We didn't even have a JV program, but we'd have 20 kids on the roster every year. And a lot of our sports did the same. There were a few that struggled a little bit with recruiting, but a lot of them did a good job. And you could see the number of kids at the school was going down while the population percentage of student athletes kept going up. So we were essentially the reason that Northland kept staying open. Like we got to the point where we were like 65% student athlete, which is
Wow.
kind of a danger zone type of area. And yet we were bringing in more kids and becoming a bigger part of the population, but our budgets kept getting cut more and more and more and more. And we kind of said, well, you can't keep cutting the budgets or we're going to lose the ability to bring in students. And when I first got there, year one, we were $37,000 a year. When I left, we were 56. And so over the course of 11 years, we went up $19,000 while our student population dipped. And the amount of kids that were student athletes, the percentage went up, and it became a situation where it was really, really difficult to see it surviving. And when the opportunity came up to leave there, even though I'm giving up being a head coach to come to an institution like the University of Dubuque, I had to jump on it right away.
Yeah, no doubt. I completely understand that, and you make it. I've said it on here before a couple times, but it's so true. When you're at an enrollment driven institution and you bring in the amount you need or you bring in more and you're doing it to help the institution, but then the institution isn't hitting its overall enrollment goal, and now your budget's getting slapped. Now you have more kids with less money to deal with. And it's just like, and again, there's so many schools that go through that, but you want to talk about a real frustrating experience where you're like, hey, I feel like I'm doing a solid here. I'm helping everybody out. But actually, it's making it more problematic for you because maybe you're not getting JV games. Maybe you got to figure different ways to fundraise. And it's just like that ever evolving circle, right? Like it never seems to end. So, you mentioned that you're at Dubuque now. I think you just finished year 3 there.
Mhm.
Great institution, always highly known in terms of the athletic world. There's 3 institutions in the Dubuque area. 1,000 people. You're talking just before we got on air here how much of a vibe there is going on in the Dubuque area. I mean, what have you enjoyed the last 3 years there?
Well, like I was saying before we started recording, I when you're in Ashland, Wisconsin, a town of 8,000 people, when you want to go for dinner, it's you want McDonald's or Burger King, that's it. And here it's a little bit different, with the Dubuque area is so phenomenal. And first, and let me just say, how much because I'm sure he'll probably watch this, how much I appreciate our head coach Rob Sieverding for even giving me the opportunity, because it's a risk, right? When you're a head coach and you have another head coach who's interested in being your assistant, you just don't like it. We knew of each other, but we didn't really know each other particularly well. And for him to say, all right, I'm going to take a chance on bringing in this guy, like, you don't know, like, is this guy coming in to try to take my job up? Well, and I'm like, I'm not here to do anything but help this program get to whatever level you want it to get to. And Rob and I have become, pretty dang tight over the last 3 years, is the way that head coaches and assistant coaches often do. And so it's one of those deals where I can't thank him and the administration enough, because I wasn't there when Northland closed, right? Like we left beforehand, and by we I mean me and my fiance, and we left beforehand, and then it really kind of fell off a cliff the last couple of years after I had left, and that's not to say that I don't appreciate everything Northland did for me. I really do, and the presidents and administrations that I work for, they did as great a job as taking care of me as well. But it's one of those deals where you kind of felt like you didn't have a choice. What would have happened if I had stayed and the school closed? Now I might be, well, one, I'd be out of a job, but two, I might be out of the business, right?
Yeah.
And so just trying to keep an eye on those types of situations. And obviously University of Dubuque does not have that problem, between we literally just got a $60 million donation. We're starting med school. We bought a 121,000 square foot building downtown Dubuque to start med school. We got a donation about 6 months ago to knock down the building next to our gym. We're going to knock that building down. They're literally starting that right now. And we're building a $35 million new building and adding engineering as a major, a couple of different types of engineering. You know what I mean? So we're not in this, we're in the complete opposite
Yeah.
situation as Northland, where you feel comfortable. You don't have to worry about those types of things. And obviously winning helps, and having a boss that I love working for makes things so much easier. Like, he lets me coach and takes my ideas into consideration always. Whether or not he goes with them is totally up to him, and I'll back him, one way or another. And he's a foul up 3 guy, and I'm a defend. You know what I mean? So, and we've done both. So, given different situations, and but just kind of one of those deals where I think I appreciate the fact that he's allowed me the opportunity to come in and be myself while supporting his vision of the program. And I think he appreciates the fact that he has somebody sitting next to him that has been through everything. And I kind of told him that when I came down and essentially interviewed with him. I kind of told him, imagine what it would be like to have somebody that knows everything you're going through on a day-to-day basis, and will put out all the fires that he can before they even reach your desk, and has the wherewithal to know what are the things that you need to know about, and what are some of the things that I can just take care of on my own that you don't even have to worry about. And I think that kind of, and I think
That's a pretty good sell.
that yeah, it is. And we came down, my fiance and I came down, and we toured around Dubuque, and we toured the facilities, like walked around campus and everything. And we drove around, and she goes, look, there's a Target and a Chick-fil-A and a Chipotle and a Five Guys and a Jersey Mike's, and they're all within the same strip mall area. And she goes, "If you get offered this job, you're gonna take it." And then that night, it was like the night before I had to choose, Rob had texted me and goes, "Hey, by the way, we're going to Hawaii next year. Just wanted to remind you of that." And that was kind of his last selling point, like, "Come join us so you can go to, take your fiance and go with the team and go to Hawaii." And and there's not a day that's gone by that I don't feel completely blessed to have this opportunity and be a part of this program. And the last 6 years we're 113-37 overall, which is insane. We've won 3 out of the last 6 conference championship and been to we got an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament my first year and won the conference championship last year. And we got a little bit by the injury bug this year, but still made it to the conference tournament championship game, and just kind of ran out of gas 3 games in 5 days. One of them being 6 hours away in Nebraska. We got back on Friday morning at like 4 o'clock in the morning and then had to play the next day. Like, we just, flat out ran out of gas. And I give credit to the team that beat us. They played a really good second half against us. So yeah,
That sounds like Division III life in the American Rivers.
that it is. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah,
Well, Scott, man, I can't
yeah,
thank you enough for jumping on episode 64 here. Like I said, I was telling you, I think before air, it's always actually more difficult to interview people I feel like, than you don't know, because again, you learn so much about them, but there's things you already know, and it's like you still got to ask those questions because the people on the outside don't necessarily know it. So I appreciate you jumping on and sitting down, and yeah, love the grit that you've always had and the wherewithal to keep going.
yeah. I appreciate it. And you've always been a dear friend, and I know we stay in contact as often as we can. But you know how it is. Coaches are interesting animals, right? Like, we try to stay in contact with our friends, and then you have so many contacts that you need to reach out to on a monthly basis or whatever. And then the season hits, and we're all scrambling around trying to do 10 million. I teach classes here at UD, a couple classes every semester. We have our Sparty Awards, which is kind of our version of the ESPYS, coming up on Monday night, and yours truly gets to be the host because I have the voice to
Nice.
do it.
Yeah.
I'm doing the PA announcing for the baseball game on Saturday because it's their alumni day, and we have a bunch of events going on. And I do some PA announcing for the hockey team and volleyball team and different sports throughout the year. And I mean, that's part of the deal. Like, if I can do a quick shameless plug, like, for if there's any young coaches out there that are just graduating or players that are just graduating, we will be opening up our graduate assistant spot, because our GA is graduating this year, and so we're working hard to try to help him find his next spot. But we're going to be it's technically open, but we haven't posted it yet because it's going through all the HR processes right now, that it typically has to do every 2 years. So if there's anybody that's looking to be a GA or interested in getting into college, you don't always have to go to Wisconsin or you know what I mean, or UCLA to be a GA. Here as a GA, you're essentially like the second. You still have to do the grunt work, but so do I, right? You still have to do but you're essentially the second assistant for us. Like, you're coaching on the court. You're the head coach of the JV team. Like, you're getting your experience and all that kind of stuff to go along with all the grunt work that we as coaches have to do and that kind of thing. And so,
Oh, no, no, no. There's a lot of good nuggets in here. And again, just hearing people's stories, like you said, it's kind of hard to replicate anybody's story, right? Everybody's a little bit more unique, but no, definitely kind of going back to the Extreme Basketball Association and the Ontario League. Definitely good stories there. So I appreciate you jumping on, man.